Have you ever noticed how the same wounds keep finding you? How the same pain knocks at your door wearing different faces, different names, different circumstances? But underneath, it's the same pain you've always known. What if the universe isn't conspiring against you? What if you're simply being invited to heal what you've been carrying all this time? The wounds you refuse to touch become the shadows that follow you everywhere. The pain you run from becomes the very current that determines which shore you wash up on, again and again. This isn't punishment. This is the soul's deepest wisdom at work. If you don't heal it, you'll repeat it. This is the room where we finally turn around and face what's been chasing us all along. You've felt it before, haven't you? That sinking feeling when a relationship disintegrates in the exact same way as the last one, when a friendship withers along familiar lines, when you find yourself in the same argument with different people, speaking the same words your younger self once spoke. It's not coincidence, it's not bad luck. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've disowned, the wounds we've buried, the emotions we've learned to silence. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what you're calling fate is actually memory. What you're calling bad luck is actually an unhealed pattern. What you're calling just the way things are is actually a wound that's begging for your attention. How many times have you said, "Why does this keep happening to me?" Perhaps the better question is, what inside you needs to be witnessed before this cycle can finally end? Your body remembers everything. Every harsh word that made you fold into yourself. Every time you weren't chosen. Every moment you learned it wasn't safe to be seen, to be soft, to need, to want, to speak. The body keeps the score, and what the mind forgets, the body replays. When did you first learn that you were too much? When did you first decide that parts of you needed to be locked away? When did that voice first whisper that you weren't enough as you were? These aren't just memories. They're active instructions running in the background of your life. They're the invisible hands steering you towards certain people, certain situations, certain feelings that feel unbearably familiar. You aren't choosing these patterns consciously, but a part of you is choosing them over and over, hoping that this time the story might end differently. Physician and author Gabor Maté reminds us, the attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. Think about that. The very attempt to escape what hurts is what keeps the hurt alive. The wounds you refuse to look at don't disappear. They simply go underground. They become the invisible architects of your choices, your reactions, your perceptions. You're not broken. You're not cursed. You're simply caught in the gravity of old pain that was never fully processed, never fully honored, never fully released. Your nervous system learned long ago how to survive. It learned what was safe and what wasn't. It learned when to fight, when to flee, when to freeze. And it has been faithfully following those same instructions ever since, even when the danger is long gone. When was the last time you told your nervous system that the war is over, that you're safe now, that the strategies that once protected you are now the very things keeping you trapped? Perhaps you find yourself drawn to people who can't fully show up for you. Perhaps you abandon yourself the moment conflict arises. Perhaps you build walls so high that even you can't remember what it feels like to be truly seen. These aren't character flaws. These aren't signs of unworthiness. These are the echoes of old wounds. These are the ways your system learned to protect itself when protection was necessary. These are the shadows of survival strategies that once saved you. But what once saved you is now sabotaging you. The very armor you built to protect your heart has become the prison keeping love out. The very walls you erected to avoid rejection have become the barriers preventing connection. The very silence you learned to maintain has become the void where your voice should be. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. But how can light enter when we keep sealing the cracks? How can healing begin when we keep running from the very pain that needs our attention?" You repeat what you don't repair. You relive what you don't release. You recreate what you don't reconcile. Look at your life closely. Where do you feel stuck in a loop? Where do you feel that familiar ache of, "Here we go again"? Where do you find yourself saying, Why am I still dealing with this? That's not the universe punishing you. That's not proof of your brokenness. That's the fingerprint of an unhealed wound, still pulsing beneath the surface of your consciousness. It's asking for your attention. Not your judgment, not your frustration, not your resignation, just your willing, compassionate attention. When did you decide that looking away was safer than looking inward? When did you convince yourself that numbing the pain was better than moving through it? The patterns we can't seem to break aren't random. They're precise reflections of our deepest, most tender wounds. If you find yourself constantly seeking validation from those who withhold it, perhaps you're trying to heal the wound of not feeling valued in your early life. If you find yourself abandoning your needs the moment someone expresses disappointment, perhaps you're trying to heal the wound of conditional love. If you find yourself in relationships where you give and give while receiving little in return, perhaps you're trying to heal the wound of having to earn affection through self-sacrifice. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung observed, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The people who trigger us most aren't our enemies. They're our greatest teachers. They're the mirrors reflecting back the parts of ourselves we've yet to reconcile." What if the person who frustrates you most is actually illuminating a wounded part of yourself that's crying out for integration? What if the relationship pattern that keeps repeating is actually pointing directly to what needs healing? The cycle continues until awareness interrupts it. The pattern persists until consciousness dissolves it. You can't heal what you can't feel. You can't transform what you can't name. You can't integrate what you continue to avoid. This is why we repeat, not because we're broken or unworthy or undeserving of peace, but because healing demands our presence. It demands our willingness to turn toward the very things we've spent a lifetime turning away from. The American Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes, "Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. The lesson will repeat until it's learned. The wound will speak until it's heard. The pattern will continue until its purpose is fulfilled." What is your recurring pattern trying to teach you? What wisdom lies buried in the very pain you've been trying to escape? Perhaps you've tried to outrun your patterns. Perhaps you've changed cities, changed partners, changed jobs, changed friend groups, only to find the same dynamics recreating themselves in new environments. That's because wherever you go, there you are. The geography of your inner landscape remains unchanged until you have the courage to explore it. You can't outrun the shadow. You can only turn and face it. When you finally turn around, you might discover something surprising. The monster you've been fleeing isn't a monster at all. It's just a wounded part of yourself, desperate to be acknowledged, desperate to be held, desperate to come home. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned, "Be careful when you fight the monsters, lest you become one." But perhaps the greater wisdom is this: be careful when you run from the monsters, lest you never discover they were just lost pieces of yourself all along. Healing begins with witnessing, not fixing, not forcing, not rushing, just witnessing with compassion what is true within you. The neglected emotions, the abandoned child, the silenced voice, the buried rage, the smothered grief, all the parts you were told were too much, too dark, too heavy, too inappropriate. These aren't defects to be eliminated. These are fragments of your wholeness waiting to be reclaimed. When did you decide that certain emotions weren't allowed? When did you learn that vulnerability was dangerous? When did you determine that your authentic self was unacceptable? Those weren't your original conclusions. Those were adaptations to an environment that couldn't hold all of you. Those were compromises you made to survive in relationships that required your smallness. But you don't live there anymore. You don't need those adaptations anymore. You don't have to make those compromises anymore. The invitation isn't to perfect yourself. The invitation is to remember yourself, to gather all the pieces you've disowned, to call back all the parts you've exiled. This is how the cycle breaks. Not through self-improvement, but through self-remembering. Not through force, but through integration. Not through escape, but through presence. Eastern philosopher Lao Tzu reminds us, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. But the present can only be fully inhabited when we've made peace with the past that lives within us. The unprocessed past doesn't stay in the past. It becomes the lens through which we perceive the present. It becomes the template onto which we project the future. How might your life transform if you could meet each moment freshly, unburdened by the distortions of old pain? How might your relationships deepen if you could see others clearly, rather than through the filter of unhealed wounds? The work of healing isn't linear. It doesn't follow a tidy timeline. It moves in spirals, bringing you back to the same themes, the same wounds, but hopefully with greater awareness each time, with more resources, with deeper compassion. Sometimes it feels like you're moving backward. Sometimes it feels like you'll never break free. Sometimes the pattern seems more entrenched than ever. But each time you meet the pattern with consciousness, rather than reaction, something shifts. Each time you choose awareness over avoidance, something transforms. Each time you respond with compassion rather than judgment, something heals. As psychologist and meditation teacher Tara Brach puts it, the only way out is through. There are no shortcuts in healing. There are no bypasses around the wounded places. There is only the brave, tender journey inward toward the very pain we've been avoiding. When was the last time you turned toward your pain with genuine curiosity rather than resistance? When was the last time you asked your recurring pattern what it's trying to protect you from? The patterns we repeat aren't simply behaviors. They're beliefs in action. They're stories made manifest. They're the tangible expression of how we've come to understand ourselves and the world. If you believe, even unconsciously, that you're unworthy of love, you'll find evidence to support that belief everywhere. You'll choose partners who reinforce it. You'll interpret neutral actions as confirmation. You'll create situations that validate it. If you believe, somewhere in the depths of your psyche, that vulnerability leads to abandonment, you'll armor yourself in ways that actually create the very disconnection you fear. Our deepest beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. Our most painful patterns are these prophecies playing out in real time. Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca observed, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But what happens when the imagination becomes so convincing that we mistake it for reality? What happens when the stories we tell ourselves become the very fabric of our experience? The cycle breaks when we recognize that we are not our patterns. We are the awareness that can observe these patterns. We are the consciousness that can choose differently. You are not your wounds. You are not your past. You are not the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve. You are the silent witness behind all of these. You are the vast sky in which these clouds of thought and emotion move. You are the spacious awareness that can hold it all without becoming any of it. When you touch this truth, even for a moment, the pattern loses its grip. The cycle begins to dissolve. The repetition compulsion has nowhere to land in the vastness of your true nature. The mystical poet Rumi reminds us, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Your essence is not defined by the limiting patterns you've absorbed. Your true nature is vast, boundless, whole. Can you sense, beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the adaptive strategies, beneath all the protective patterns, the presence of something untouched? Something that has never been wounded, never been broken, never been lost. The healing journey isn't about eliminating darkness. It's about bringing light to the dark places. It's not about silencing the pain. It's about listening to what the pain has been trying to tell you. When you finally listen, you might hear something surprising. You might discover that your anxiety has been trying to protect you from perceived threats. You might realize that your people-pleasing has been attempting to secure connection in the only way it knew how. You might understand that your perfectionism has been working tirelessly to earn the love it thought wasn't freely given. These patterns aren't your enemies. They're misguided allies. They're parts of you doing the best they could with the information they had. As you begin to understand this, truly understand it, not just intellectually but viscerally, a profound compassion can emerge. Not just for yourself, but for everyone caught in their own unconscious patterns, everyone recreating their own unhealed wounds. We are all, in our own ways, trying to resolve what remains unresolved within us. We are all trying to complete what was left incomplete. We are all trying to receive now what we didn't receive then. The difference lies in whether we do this consciously or unconsciously, whether we do this with awareness or on autopilot, whether we do this with intention or compulsion. When the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom," he was pointing to this crucial difference. The unconscious repetition of old patterns leaves no space between stimulus and response. The trigger happens and the reaction follows, automatic and immediate. But consciousness creates space. Awareness inserts a pause. In that pause lives the possibility of a new choice, a different response, a fresh path forward. Can you feel the space opening within you even now? Can you sense the possibility of meeting old triggers with new responses? Can you imagine what might change if you brought conscious awareness to the very patterns that have seemed so immutable? The most profound healing often happens in relationship, not just in relationship with therapists or healers, but in relationship with those brave enough to love us as we are while supporting us in becoming who we might be. In the presence of secure attachment, old insecure attachments can gradually transform. In the container of compassionate witness, ancient shame can slowly dissolve. In the light of unconditional positive regard, the parts of ourselves we've judged most harshly can finally come home. This is why the most challenging relationships often catalyze the deepest healing. They trigger the oldest wounds, activate the most entrenched patterns, and bring to the surface what has been hidden in the depths. But only if we're willing to stay present. Only if we're willing to get curious rather than reactive. Only if we're willing to use the relationship as a mirror rather than a battlefield. As the spiritual teacher Ram Dass said, "We're all just walking each other home." Perhaps our relationships aren't meant to complete us or fix us or save us. Perhaps they're meant to illuminate the places within us that are still journeying toward wholeness. The cycle of repetition isn't your enemy. It's not punishment. It's not proof of your brokenness. It's the soul's elegant way of bringing to consciousness what remains unhealed. It will continue until its purpose is fulfilled. It will persist until its message is received. It will repeat until healing happens. But healing doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean never being triggered again. It doesn't mean complete freedom from old patterns. Healing means having a different relationship with the pattern. It means responding rather than reacting. It means meeting the old wound with new awareness. It means finding, in the very place where you once felt most trapped, a doorway to greater freedom. The poet Mary Oliver asks, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Perhaps the most profound answer is this: to heal what can be healed, to integrate what has been fragmented, to make whole what has been broken. Not to achieve some imagined state of perfection, but to embrace the messy, beautiful wholeness that already exists beneath the patterns of protection. There will be days when the old pattern reasserts itself with surprising force. There will be moments when you find yourself caught in the familiar loop, wondering if anything has changed at all. This isn't failure. This is the nature of the spiral path. This is what it means to be human, navigating the complex terrain of consciousness, unconsciousness, wounding and healing. The question isn't whether you'll ever trigger again. The question is, can you bring compassion to those moments rather than judgment? Can you meet yourself with understanding rather than criticism? Can you see the activation of the old pattern not as a step backward but as another opportunity to choose differently? Psychiatrist and researcher Bessel van der Kolk suggests, being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. But perhaps equally important is being able to feel safe with ourselves, especially in the moments when we falter, when we forget, when we find ourselves repeating what we thought we had healed. Can you be that safe harbor for yourself? Can you hold your own struggles with the same tenderness you would offer a beloved friend? The invitation isn't to transcend your humanity. It isn't to rise above your wounds or to bypass your pain. It isn't to achieve some perfect state where triggers never arise and patterns never reassert themselves. The invitation is to embrace it all, to include what has been excluded, to welcome what has been rejected, to integrate what has been fragmented. This is the path of wholeness, not the pursuit of perfection, but the embodiment of integration, not the elimination of darkness, but the courageous choice to bring light to the darkest places within. Zen teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called this the path of the sacred warrior, one who is brave enough to face themselves fully, to open to all of their experience without armor, to meet their own shadow with compassion rather than fear. What would it mean for you to walk this path? What would change if you committed to healing rather than repeating, to integration rather than fragmentation, to presence rather than avoidance? The patterns you can't seem to break are not your destiny. They're not a life sentence. They're not proof of your unworthiness. They're invitations, they're doorways, they're opportunities disguised as obstacles. Each time the old wound speaks through a current situation, it's offering you another chance to listen more deeply, to understand more fully, to heal more completely. Author and spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle reminds us, the pain that you create now is always some form of non-acceptance, some form of unconscious resistance to what is. The path beyond repetition begins with radical acceptance of what is, including the very patterns you long to transcend. Not acceptance as resignation, not acceptance as defeat, but acceptance as the necessary starting point for genuine transformation, acceptance as the ground from which authentic change can grow. Can you accept even your non-acceptance? Can you embrace even your resistance? Can you love even the parts of yourself that seem most unlovable? If you don't heal it, you'll repeat it. But healing doesn't happen through force. It doesn't happen through self-improvement projects or rigid spiritual practices or harsh inner discipline. Healing happens through presence, through compassion, through curiosity, through the willingness to stay with what is difficult rather than turning away. It happens when you finally turn toward the pain you've been running from and discover that it's not what you feared. It's not bottomless. It's not endless. It's not too much to bear. It's just unmet experience waiting for your attention. It's just unfelt emotion waiting for your willingness. It's just an unloved part of yourself waiting to be welcomed home. The psychologist Carl Rogers observed, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." Perhaps the healing you seek doesn't require you to become someone else. Perhaps it begins with the radical acceptance of who you already are, patterns, wounds, struggles, and all. You are more than your patterns. You are more than your wounds. You are more than the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what's possible for you. You are the awareness in which all of these arise and dissolve. You are the presence that can hold it all without becoming any of it. You are the love that can embrace every fragmented part of yourself and invite it home. This is your birthright. Not freedom from struggle, but freedom within struggle. Not a life without pain, but a life in which pain is held in a larger context of wholeness. Not the absence of patterns, but the presence of awareness that transforms their grip. The Indian spiritual teacher Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj said, "The mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it." Perhaps the patterns that seem most insurmountable are crossable not through mental force, but through the courageous tenderness of the heart. Can you bring that tenderness to your own struggle? Can you offer that compassion to your own repetitive patterns? Can you extend that understanding to your own unhealed places? If this room has given you something, a moment of recognition, a breath of possibility, a glimpse of what healing might look like, I invite you to pause, to breathe, to let it settle into the places within you that needed to hear these words. This isn't just about understanding intellectually. It's about allowing something to shift in the very core of your being. It's about opening to the possibility that the patterns you've been caught in aren't your destiny. They're just signposts pointing toward what longs to be healed. If a particular line resonated within you, let it echo. Let it work its way into the soil of your consciousness. Let it become a seed of awareness that might, with time and tending, grow into a new way of being. And if you feel moved to share what awakened in you while in this room, leave your reflection below. Not as a comment, but as a marker of your presence here, as a thread that might lead someone else to the very insight they've been seeking. The wounds we don't heal, we repeat. But in the very act of turning toward what hurts with willingness and compassion, we begin to interrupt the cycle. We begin to chart a new course. We begin to write a different story. And in that new story, the old pain isn't an enemy to be vanquished. It's a teacher whose lesson has finally been received. It's a guide whose purpose has been fulfilled. It's a wound transformed into wisdom, a shadow integrated into light. This is the alchemy of healing. This is the miracle waiting on the other side of repetition. This is what becomes possible when you finally turn toward what you've been running from all along. What part of you needed to hear these words today? What pattern has been asking for your attention? What wound has been waiting for your willingness to heal? The answer lives in the quiet space within you, the space that opened, even if just for a moment, as you sat in this room, the space where healing begins.